Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, slash whatever time it is where you are. Welcome to the pilot episode 4 of the Evening Moon podcast. We still don't have a name for this podcast. We're still calling it the Evening Moon in honour of our employer. My name is Ben Cowles, and I'm joined by
Steve. Do you want me to say it?
Yeah, you say it.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm Steve Sweeney.
We both work for the Morning Star newspaper, but everything we say in this podcast is entirely separate from that. All the views and opinions and etc. are our own and not theirs. Cool?
Cool.
So one thing I also need to mention right at the start here is that I said in the last podcast that we would have the interview with Marcel Cartier up within the week. Obviously, I've not done that, but we are working on it and it should be finished. Editing audio takes fucking ages and I don't really enjoy doing it. So look out for that. We've also got an interview coming up with game workers, a new union that's been set up for game workers called Game Workers Unite UK or something along those lines. And that will be coming up, let's just say soon.
I think it's safer to say that.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about a few different stories. We're going to talk about the second reading of the immigration bill passing on Monday night, Monday, January the 28th. We're going to have a sports story, which will be a first, and we should have a guest person appearing in that slot. But first, we're going to talk about the events going on in Venezuela. And we're going to start with a clip, which is hopefully going to work, of Chris Williamson, the legendary Labour MP for Derby North, probably my local MP actually, from where I live, from where I grew up even. And this is him speaking in the House of Commons yesterday. Are you ready, Steve?
Yeah.
The Venezuelan economy has been crippled by US sanctions, and the UN rapporteur, the first UN rapporteur to visit the country for 21 years, is quoted as saying this, Mr. Speaker: US sanctions on the country are illegal and could amount to crimes against humanity under international law. And a former special rapporteur, Alfred Desire, said that the US is waging economic warfare against Venezuela. The issue is this, Mr. Speaker. There is a real danger. This country, Venezuela, is divided. There is no doubt about that. But the truth is, millions support the Maduro government, and there is huge opposition to it. But intervention from the United States, Mr. Speaker, could precipitate a civil war and lead to a humanitarian catastrophe. So can the minister explain why the double standards? Is it that he's wanting to facilitate another humanitarian catastrophe, as we're seeing in Yemen with British arms? Does he want to see the same in Venezuela? And does he not support self-determination of peoples around the world rather than intervention from Western powers?
The legendary Chris Williamson there. Steve, Chris Williamson was talking about a UN rapporteur who went to Venezuela yesterday.
Alfred Desires.
He
didn't go to Venezuela yesterday.
He didn't go to Venezuela yesterday.
He wasn't there yesterday. He was there. He was there last year. He was the first UN rapporteur to visit the country for 21 years, and he presented his report to the United Nations in September. And I mean, it was a pretty comprehensively damning report about the US sanctions regime. I should start by saying that the US sanctions on Venezuela, the US behaviour towards Venezuela is, what Trump's doing now is just really a continuation of what happened under Obama. There's a lot of sugarcoating, I think, of the Obama regime, but it was Obama who first declared Venezuela a threat to national security and started imposing sanctions. Obviously, these have intensified now, but the impact of the sanctions was laid bare by the UN Special Rapporteur, who called it. He said it was an economic warfare that was being waged by the US, but it's not only hurting the economy. He said it was killing Venezuelans. So I mean, this is a pretty serious kind of thing to say. He was saying that the impact of that is that there's, falls mainly on the poorest people in Venezuela, and they're suffering with, shortages of food, shortages of medicine, partly to do with the bosses' strike as well, a strike of capitalism, which is withholding a lot of supplies for people in the country. But this is a country that's very dependent on on oil again, which has been the target of US sanctions. But what he said that the International Criminal Court should be investigating the economic sanctions placed against Venezuela as possible crimes against humanity. I mean, he used international law, Article 7 of the Rome Statute was what he used, but he said they're illegal because they'd never been endorsed by the UN Security Council. In other words, that the US is just acting independently of all kind of institutional norms and against international law. Which
we've seen this before, haven't we?
We've seen it many times before, and this is the US's usual way of conducting its business. But this is is a historical pattern, certainly in the region where the US has has a long history of imposing sanctions and threatening or using military intervention in countries that elect leaders that they don't like, that threaten imperialist interests. I mean, we saw it in Chile most famously, I think, with the against Salvador Allende, where tens of thousands of people disappeared, and it laid the groundwork for the brutal dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet.
They've got a history. Like, off the top of my head, they've done it. They've toppled governments or put in dictators that are friendly to them in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Cuba, and everywhere else in South America.
And they've propped up Pinochet. They've propped up regimes in Argentina. They supported the military junta in Brazil. Of course, this is nothing spectacularly new for the US. But it's things are now entering a very dangerous period with Juan Guaido, who we mentioned in last week's show, announcing himself the interim president of the US, and he swore himself in as the interim president. But now he's been recognised by so there's this division now where he's been recognised by the US and their imperialist lackeys. Unsurprisingly, the UK has fallen in behind, behind the US. I mean, UK has not had its own independent foreign policy for a long time. I mean, a long time. So they've fallen in, as have Germany, as have France, as have Spain, as has Israel. The countries I mentioned previously issued an ultimatum to Maduro, giving him 8 days to hold free and fair and transparent elections. Otherwise,
that was this weekend, was it? The weekend just gone.
It was on Saturday, yeah. So they gave him 8 days, which has been rebuffed quite rightly by at the United Nations. They said, well, who are you to dictate to a sovereign nation where how when we hold elections we won't be held to account. By the US, we won't be told to dictated to by the US. It was quite an interesting clash, and it's worth watching if you've got YouTube. Have a look and just see, because they mention there's a blistering attack on France, where of course they talk about the yellow vests movement. This deeply unpopular president sliding approval ratings.
I think it's down to like 16% or something. Last time I saw.
Tear gassing his own people, using violence on the streets and whatever, unrest that's been going on for 11 weeks, but still he won't stand down. That's the kind of thing that they're pointing out, the mass hypocrisy that that these countries are demanding elections there, but then ignoring what's happening on their own doorsteps. These popular movements for change. But so there's been this escalation. I mean, there's not going to be elections. I think it's worth touching on the elections a little bit, because there's often,
because that's one of the main things that they're trying to thrust at us. They're trying to make us see that they're trying to make us think that Venezuela is this undemocratic country where elections are rigged and ballot boxes are stuffed, right?
Well, that was one of the funny things. I think Jeremy Hunt said last week that
the foreign secretary, former fucking health secretary,
general disaster zone. I mean, he said last week, he made this claim, and they say it as though it's a fact. It's clear that Maduro is not the legitimate president of Venezuela, despite him winning 67.8% of the vote in May's election, and despite millions of Venezuelans still supporting him, despite the armed forces still supporting him. He says it's clear that he's not the legitimate president. And then he said the elections that were fraudulent, last year's elections, last May's elections were fraudulent, with evidence of ballot box stuffing. Now, this is incredible and it needs dealing with because it's virtually impossible to stuff ballot boxes in Venezuela because of their system. And this is a system that is open to the most incredible scrutiny and audit. I think it has 20 audits that are carried out of the ballot process in front of people and witnesses, observers from every single political party, and it's been described as watertight. I think I might have said this in the last week's show, but it's been described as watertight even by Jimmy Carter, the former US president. Now, the system is an electronic voting system. And it's used across, the whole of the electoral system. So I think it's one of only 4 countries in the world where the entire electorate uses these electronic voting systems. So this is a voting machine which is a touch screen, and it records your vote, and it's operated via fingerprint. And you have a paper receipt. It prints it out, a paper receipt for your vote once the ballot has been cast. And then it's authenticated by this fingerprint system. So it's a really kind of quite a tight system. And to say that the ballot boxes have been stuffed is nonsense. I've been in countries where ballot boxes have been stuffed. I was in Turkey for the elections last year, and for the constitutional elections, and there was clear fraud in the elections. The observers said that the elections were fraudulent. I mean, I was there when ballot boxes, the results of votes were being announced while the ballot box was still in the polling station. I mean, it was, when I observed the elections, the parliamentary and presidential elections last year, there were soldiers in the polling stations, watching people they had machine guns whilst they were watching people cast their vote. So, I mean, I could talk, that's probably a whole nother show, but I mean, this is a country in Turkey where that is an ally of Britain and the US. So
and they're the most journalists in jail in the country.
I mean, at least, and I think it is worth saying, at least Venezuela have elections.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Saudi Arabia or some, you say,
don't have elections in a fucking absolute monarchy, do you? No, they're our friends. And like Bahrain, I think you wrote a story in today's paper, which is Tuesday at the time of recording. I mean, it's always whatever day it is at the time of recording.
It's Tuesday.
I'm just trying to sound official. Yeah. Excuse me. Bahrain, good old long-term ally of the West, arrested one of its opposition leaders.
The opposition leader was already in jail, but they're sentenced to life in prison.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's on these really bizarre, trumped-up espionage charges, spying charges.
Well, I don't see that all over Twitter, and no one's talking about it. No one gives a shit.
No. And of course, opposition leaders are in jail in Turkey. Most of their opposition activists and directly elected politicians. But yeah, like you said, no one cares about that. So it's very clear that this is not anything about they're not concerned about democracy. The US has never really cared about democracy. It's nothing to do with that. This is, let me think. What do you think it might be about?
I think it's probably something to do with the fact that Venezuela has the highest oil reserves in the world.
It does. It has the highest proven oil reserves anywhere in the world. And, coincidence? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I don't think it is. But, so they're really pushing for this Guaido, who, let's be honest, nobody had heard of this guy. If you'd have mentioned his name to anybody maybe 2 weeks ago, nobody would have heard of him. And now he's supposed to be this, the upholder of democracy in Venezuela. But there's some very serious moves to get him recognised as a president of the country. Now, there was a story, I mean, this is a story I covered last year, but it's now becoming quite a little bit more interesting, that the Venezuelan gold. And Venezuela has 1.3 billion pounds, I think, $1.3 billion of gold in the Bank of England. It represents, I think, an eighth of its foreign reserves. So obviously this is quite important to Venezuela. Now, they requested last year, when I covered the story, they requested that the Bank of England return it, and they gave some excuse why they couldn't do it, and they said no. Now, they've tried again this year. Venezuela have tried again. They've requested that the Bank of England return the gold, but they have been pressured. The Bank of England have been pressured by surprise, surprise, the US, who have been saying that that you shouldn't give them their gold back, that it's an illegal it would be an illegal transaction. And what they're trying to do is block this gold from going back to the sovereign state of Venezuela, and they're hoping to use it and channel it to Juan Guaido for his to bolster his bid for the presidency. So this is they've really upped the stakes in this, and it's
on top of the economic sanctions. That's just going to make the situation in the country much worse.
Yeah, which is of course exactly what they want. So Venezuela is in a really critical situation at the moment. It is absolutely essential that here in Britain that we lobby our government and to withdraw its support for Guaido and to actually back the sovereign elected government of Venezuela and withdraw their support for that. I mean, we need to break that support for Guaido and break the attempted coup. This is Chile running all over again. It's the same kind of same pattern as we've seen.
Same cycle we've seen
exactly.
In Iran, Vietnam, Chile, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, Libya, and Syria.
Exactly.
Every single time, and I just want to have a moan about the media at the moment, if I may. Every single time, all those wars I just reeled off there, which luckily I wrote down. Every single time, our media backs them. It backs the lies. It backs the propaganda that we get from the US and from Britain. They very rarely, maybe in Vietnam they did, but they very rarely, the media tries to counter this propaganda that we have, and they just feed it. And there's a tweet I've got up on my laptop here from Media Lens from the other day, and they're talking about an article that was in the Observer on the Sunday just gone. And they said, an Observer editorial yesterday asserted that Nicolas Maduro was re-elected Venezuela's president last May by fraudulent means. And you've already said this is not true. And they point out that this is not the view of human rights lawyer Daniel M. Kavalik, hopefully I pronounced his name right, who was part of the International Electoral Accompaniment Mission. And they've got a link to a Venezuela analysis story. And another thing that I would think was worth pointing out is Jonathan Cook. If you don't know who Jonathan Cook is, he is a brilliant journalist who covers Israel and Palestine most of the time. He's also a former Guardian journalist, and now he mainly blogs. And he talks about an article that was in the Guardian, I think, late last week. And the article is by Juan Guaido, and he wrote in the Guardian about Venezuela's last chance to leave this chaos behind. And Jonathan Cook says on Twitter that he says that it's extraordinary, even by the Guardian standards. Juan Guaido, the CIA's pick to lead a coup against Venezuela's government, gives the paper one of its first interviews, and it simply acts as a conduit for his propaganda. It doesn't even pretend to be a watchdog. He goes on and says, reading this, one can understand why Guaido chose the Guardian for the interview. It is an entirely undeserved credibility among many on the left, especially in the US, but is usually only too willing to act as a stenographer to the Washington power elite. Here you can see how the formula works. The Guardian uncritically regurgitates Guaido's CIA talking points, but then panders to the left constituency by questioning the coup's leader's ties to Trump and Brazil's Bolsonaro. The legitimacy of the coup itself goes unexamined. And that's the thing. That's the thing I think it should be in everyone's mind when we're hearing anything to do about Venezuela. Whatever you think about it, the thing that needs to be foremost in your mind is that Venezuela has the highest proven oil reserves in the world.
Perfect. I think yes, I think that's incredibly important. One other thing is that that is cropping up is this ban on opposition parties from standing in elections. It's again this is deliberately misleading, and this is not the case. The opposition parties boycotted the elections, and it meant under the constitution that they forfeited their right to stand in further elections. But they boycotted those elections. They refused to stand. They called on the people to boycott the elections, and it's because they know they can't win, and that's why we're seeing this coup, because they cannot win if a democratic election. And we need to, that's something again that really needs to be pressed home. That it was the opposition parties who boycotted the elections. So this media narrative that's being spun out around an undemocratic leader banning opposition parties, who's deeply unpopular with the people, who's caused this economic crisis. I think we've dealt with that. But because this is being played out in the media as something which is and that's part of the propaganda war, and that's part of the coup attempt. I mean, the media are playing their role in that by lining up behind US imperialism, and they're effectively leading the charge and calling for regime change in Venezuela.
And it follows a similar pattern. Like, one of the things that they focus on Maduro so often and try to paint him out to be this completely insane, evil dictator is the same pattern we saw in Iraq, although Saddam was not great, but still the invasion, it paves the way to the invasion to continuously paint these people as insane madmen who need to be opposed. But we never question why it's Britain and America's role to do it in places with lots of natural resources.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
We could talk about Venezuela forever.
We could, and I'm sure by the time this podcast goes out, things will have changed. There will be all sorts of dramatic developments, and we'll probably come back to it in next week's show.
Yes. So the next story is a story that I've done a bit of research on. I haven't done enough research, I'll admit, but it's something that I'm quite passionate about, good old immigration. As someone who was born in a foreign country.
Oh yes, you're Mexican, aren't you?
Yes, I'm Mexican. I was born in El Paso, Texas, which used to be part of Mexico until the United States stole it in 18 something or other. I need to read up more about my history. So I want to talk about the immigration bill, which passed its second reading last night. And I'm going to read a little bit of how Diane Abbott, the Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, has described this immigration bill. So she says, this immigration bill is the most serious threat to all workers for decades. Because the risk of super exploitation will be built into the legal system. The new immigration bill introduces an entirely new work visa for just 12 months. For those who Tory ministers persist in calling low-skilled workers, who are in reality underpaid workers. The government's policy amounts to a permanent campaign against migration and migrants as a scapegoat, God, I can't read, for the effects of their own austerity policies. Basically, one of the worst things about this immigration bill is it's going to give the employers the power to give so-called low-skilled workers the power to deport them. And basically, immigrants that come into the country will be in the hands of the bosses.
So hang on, the bosses are acting as a police or immigration force.
Essentially, that's what will happen. And we see this in schools at the moment. There's a movement to stop the school census, because the school census also asks their parents to put their children where they were born. And then we've seen, I think there's a group called Teachers Not Borders or something along those lines. Really should do my research. That is trying to stop this census going through. So it's just another thing that this Tory government, which has introduced the hostile environment, is trying to lower immigration by any means necessary. And they keep harping on about this. The last two elections, they promised to keep the immigration cap at 10,000 immigrants, no more than 10,000 or 100,000 or some ridiculous number. And every time they fail to do it. But what they are doing is taking it out on their own citizens. They have been taking it out on their own citizens, particularly people who are married to foreign nationals. If you're a British person and married to a foreign national, if you don't earn enough money, then that foreign person can't come into the country. If you don't earn more than £18,600 a year, then you can't bring a non-EU spouse into the country. So it's just yet another the way the Tories are cracking down on immigration. And I think it's quite scary that they're going to that already people in so-called low-skilled work are already at the behest of their bosses. They're already working in unsecure work and shit wages. And, they have the threat of poverty over their head all the time. But now they also have the threat of being deported, because the government will be able to, the employer will be able to revoke their visa, meaning this person is not able to get any sort of benefit, any sort of help from the government at all. Diane Abbott also goes on to say that workers who come here will in effect have no rights to employment protection, health and safety, sickness pay, maternity leave and so on, simply because they will be temporary workers under the threat of deportation in 12 months' time. So the visa is also only going to last for 12 months for low-skilled workers. But what they want to do is when people come in for non-low-skilled work, the person coming into the country needs to have an income of more than £30,000 a year, which is ridiculous.
So this is effectively like institutionalising super exploitation of workers.
Exactly.
This is incredible, and we have to say that I don't think it. Well, I don't know. If it's any coincidence that this is being brought in when you have a racist prime minister, and I say racist because I believe that she is racist,
and her policies certainly seem to say that. I think you can have an honest opinion to say she's racist.
Is my view. My view of somebody who sent these horrendous vans round the streets of London with "Go Home" on them. What message is that sending to people?
It's fucking terrible.
It was absolutely disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. But this is the Tory policy, typical Tory policy towards people that that are coming to this country for one reason or another. Many of them fleeing wars that have been created, or fleeing the very governments that are propped up by Britain, and legitimising and their attacks on people there. So this is. This is shocking, really. So what's the latest with this then, Ben? What's happened?
Well, so this immigration bill is going through Parliament. It already went through its first reading, and last night, which was Monday night, it passed the second reading by 63 votes, a majority of 63 votes. And Labour has come under a bit of criticism, actually. They initially were going to abstain from the vote, and they were hoping to seek amendments to it later, because I think a bill, from my flimsy understanding of how bills work, they have first, second, and third readings. Yeah. There's loads of committees, and then eventually gets through.
Committee stage and amendments and all sorts. Yeah.
And then they were hoping to get amendments to it. What we really need is a Labour government in power to completely revoke this thing. They were going to abstain from the vote last night, but then they had a last-minute change and said that they were going to imply the whip. What does that actually mean? I say that term, but I don't really know what that means. When they say, they're going to have a 3-line whip, a 2-line whip. You know what that means?
They have to vote in favour of, you can't defy the whip.
I see.
When you hear these things, they've had the whip withdrawn, which means that they're no longer backed, by whichever party, whichever the party they're a member of. So yeah, the 3-line whip is the most serious. It means you have to be you have to be present in Parliament, and you have to vote for that legislation.
I see. And so anyway, last night they did impose a whip. I don't think it was a 3-line. I just think it was a 1-line. They did impose the whip, and so they did turn out to vote, but some of the MPs weren't there. Some of the media have been attacking the Labour Party as trying to make them look as if they're in U-turn or they're flim-flamming on this. I don't think that's the case. I think that Labour's in quite a difficult position. They've got to appeal to both people, Leavers and Remainers. They've got to appeal to both to win this election, and that's what particularly The Guardian does not understand, that they have to appeal to both people. They can't just do one side, because then we've got Tories forever. There's an interesting quote. I don't know if me reading quotes off is all that interesting. I'm going to read a little bit of what Nick Dearden said. He is the director of Global Justice Now, which is a it's not really a charity. It's an organisation that campaigns for global trade justice across the world and against kind of globalisation, but not in a right-wing weirdo way. They work against TTIP and these trade agreements that allow companies to sue governments. Anyway, he said, today, as in last night, MPs have voted to strip millions of people of their rights. It's a shameful day for Britain. We are optimistic about amending some of the worst of this bill as it goes through Parliament. MPs should be fundamentally opposed to it from the outset. Just like the trade bill, it hands massive powers to the government to remake the immigration system through Henry VIII powers, which it will use to bypass Parliament. Giving such sweeping powers to a government which brought us the hostile environment, and which is intent on signing up to some of the worst aspects of EU migration policy by contracting out our responsibilities for refugees to deeply repressive regimes, cannot be a good idea. What's more, far from ending the hostile environment, which has been exposed as cruel and ineffective, this bill, in effect, extends it. Passing the bill would represent a big step backwards for global justice. And he goes on. But I think the really important point has been made by Grace Blakely, and she is the economic editor for the New Statesman, and you probably see her on the Politics show. She's quite famous on the left at the moment. And she says, Labour can only win on a left populist platform if they shift the blame for economic stagnation away from migrants and onto those who are truly responsible, corporate and financial elites. This means supporting increased migration and vehemently opposing the neoliberal EU. So I think it's a fantastic point she's making there. And I think if Labour could do that, they can get through. And this bill, I hope to God, it doesn't get passed.
Yeah, me too.
Now, Steve and I have doubled. We are joined by our friend and comrade Kadeem Simmonds, who is the Morning Star sports editor.
Howdy.
And we've also been joined by Gulistan Elidemir. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's right.
And you're currently on work experience with us.
Yep.
So I think we need to sit a bit closer. So we need to be closer to the mic. And we're going to do the sports story. We have a sports story. So Kadeem, as Mr. Sports, tell us the background to this Millwall story you've written about in Tuesday's Morning Star.
So Saturday evening, FA Cup, 4th round, I believe, and it's Millwall v Everton.
Mm-hmm.
After the game, a video surfaces online of Millwall fans basically chanting racist songs at the Everton fans. Excuse my language, but they were saying, I'd rather be a Paki than a Scouse. Wow, that's annoying. Sorry about that. And yeah, I've had this, I don't know if the word, I've had this idea basically for the last few months that as racism in sport gets worse, something needs to change. And my idea or proposal is start docking teams points, kicking them out of competitions, simply because stadium bans and fines don't work, And don't get me wrong, racism isn't just a football issue, it's a societal issue,
Yeah.
However, if we want to tackle it inside stadiums, hit it, for these fans, a stadium ban and a £500 fine is nothing, They'll still go watch their team down the pub, they'll probably sneak into the stadium somehow. They don't care.
What do you think about stadium bans? As in, sometimes when this has happened, there's been incidents, I think, in Europe where clubs have been forced to play behind closed doors. Now, what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, England played Croatia, I believe, back end of last year, because if I remember correctly, 2 swastikas were found on a Croatian pitch, and it's like, how does that end up there? Like, that's a pretty distinctive thing to end up on a pitch. But anyway, so that game was played behind closed doors. I think for the England fans, it's a harsh punishment if they haven't done anything. Now, again, English fans are no angels, but in that particular instance, England fans haven't done anything wrong. So you're punishing them for a Croatia problem.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, my proposal, and I'm sure someone's said this before, written about it before. That's punishing the players, punishing the manager, punishing the other fans, but something has to give.
Yeah. And
in this article, I write about how Millwall's second goal, it stems from a handball, and as they're showing the replay on the big screen, their manager, Neil Harris, is screaming to his staff upstairs, take it off the screen, take the video off the screen, because you're basically showing the whole stadium that we've cheated.
That's pretty sketchy.
Exactly, it is. And if you then think about it, well, if the punishment for racist chanting was you're getting kicked out of the competition, if a chant goes up in the stadium, and I'm not saying from 1 or 2 people, from, this video is about 50, 100, probably over that, if that chant then starts in the stadium, I can guarantee Neil Harris is screaming to those fans, will you shut the F up? Because there's no way he's going to...
You can swear in this podcast, by the way.
Thank you very much. But, there's no way Neil Harris is going to allow some idiots, up in row Z to get his team kicked out of the competition. It's the same, I'm a big NFL fan, and a couple of weeks ago, the Kansas City Chiefs played the Indianapolis Colts. It's just no game. The Colts kicker is going to take extra points and field goals and stuff like that, and fans start throwing snowballs at him, and the fans are warned, if you keep it up, there's going to be a punishment. and Kansas City head coach Andy Reid walked over to those fans and says, "Can you please stop that?" Because again, he's not going to allow some idiots throwing snowballs to derail his team's success. So personally, I believe if the FA, if any football authority turns around and says, and obviously you're going to have to find the details and in terms of how many people need to start chanting racist stuff to then bring in this punishment. But if you figure that out and say if this happens, you will be docked 3 points, I promise you, players and managers will then start to hear these racist chants and they'll be like, "Will you please shut up?" Fans around them will then start saying, "Listen, don't even think about it. You're not costing us this game. Will you please shut up or get out?"
So what you're essentially saying is that the tougher line on racism and racist chants in football needs to come from the authorities. And I mean, do you think that then, as things stand at the moment, you said things that racism was getting worse in football. Do you think the authorities aren't doing enough?
I think they're doing enough because they're doing what they are able to do. You had the Tottenham fan who threw the banana at Arsenal's Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. He was, by the police, he was given a 4-year stadium ban and a £500 fine. And I believe he'd been banned for life from Tottenham, I believe. So that's basically all they can really do. And in no way am I saying that Tottenham should be docked 3 points for one idiot fan throwing a banana. However, again, this Millwall thing wasn't one idiot fan. One idiot fan, you can hit him with a stadium ban and a fine, fair enough. When you've got a large group of people, to me, that's like, you know what, you guys now need to all be punished collectively. And basically, these people are representing the fan base. Yeah. Whether the good fans, and again, this isn't a Millwall issue, so many teams have this issue. But in terms of, using Millwall as the example because it happened on Saturday, those Millwall fans chanting that were representing Millwall Football Club, whether the good people like it or not. And, if at the end of the day, Millwall then get kicked out of the FA Cup because of it, I don't think at Millwall's next FA Cup game it happens again.
So, I mean, this is not just something that happens off the field, though, is it? I mean, I think we had the incidents very famously with Luis Suarez and Patrice Evra.
Yeah.
And it was quite sad to see. I remember at the time, Liverpool as a football club came out in support of Suarez with the Suarez T-shirts, and it sparked that kind of that I thought rather ridiculous debate. I don't think there was any room for that debate. And then we had the same incident with John Terry. And, do you think we've moved on from that? What do you think about that? Because these were very high-profile players who were, who were accused of racism on the pitch, and they were backed by their respective clubs.
Well, again, I've written about this before, in terms of when a high-profile player fucks up, basically, be it via racism, via sexual abuse, via physical abuse. If a team feels that you can win them games, they'll punish you, probably fine you a few weeks' wages, and then bring you back.
Well, Liverpool did that, didn't they?
Exactly.
There was a youth team player who was not a commodity, not of any great value to them, who was caught laughing during the Hillsborough memorial service. Now, he obviously wasn't laughing at the Hillsborough tragedy. He was caught out at a moment where he was probably not as focused and thinking about what he should have been. But he was then just, he was sent packing from the club. And this was around the same time that Suarez had, been racially abusive towards Patrice Evra, and the club came out defending him.
The way the club handled that incident was just laughable at best. You had there's pictures of Glenn Johnson, the Liverpool right back, wearing the Suarez T-shirt, and everyone's just like, dude, as a black man, you can't stand for this. And I think the sad thing coming out of that was that to this day, Patrice Evra gets booed by Liverpool fans. It's like, you're booing a guy for being racially abused. Like he's done.
Or for standing up.
Yeah,
that's fucked up.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
Again, it's you often get a situation where, especially in football, the person that's being racially abused then gets booed by that person's, and you're there going, why are you angry at me but celebrating the guy
this?
And again, it's.
But the interesting part is because there was that video that's kind of circulated. I saw it online that seemed to go viral
Of the little kid.
of the and they're looking to people like Suarez, and they're looking to people around them in a crowd, and they're repeating really. They don't know this. They have to learn it from somewhere.
And again, I mentioned that in the article. That video is an old video. That hasn't come from Saturday. That's come from years back.
Videos like the kid's about 5 years old or something, 6 years old.
I raised the point that this is why education doesn't work, or I say doesn't work. It won't work because that child.
It won't eradicate the problem.
Yeah, that child has picked up. Again, for those who haven't seen the video, it's an older woman and a young kid, and again, the kid's wearing like a police officer's uniform, and it's not a nice image. But him and I assume his nan are chanting "fuck 'em all, Millwall, Millwall," and then he gets to the end of the video, and again, excuse my language, the kid seems to get excited and like, "You fucking black cunt," and again, I write in this article that screaming, the Millwall chant is one thing, but for the child to then link that Millwall chant to "you fucking black cunt," to me means he's heard that before.
Yeah.
He
Exactly. He hasn't.
Yeah, he hasn't chanted at the end of it, score a goal, or like, Paw Patrol is the best TV show. He's chanted something. It is a really good TV show, but he chanted something which he must have heard at the end of that Millwall chant, or he's heard enough around the house. And that's, to me, it's like, well, you can educate the 50-year-old guy that grew up at a time where football was really, really racist. But to this kid, he's grown up in a time where we had assumed that this racism had been kicked out of the game. And it hasn't. Because when he goes home, when he's around his family and his family's friends, that's the kind of language, the kind of chanting, that's all he knows. So now you've got another kid who's going to grow up, if he's a Millwall fan, chanting, "I'd rather be a Paki than a Scouse" on the terraces.
Yeah.
How do you fix it? Well, you fix it by saying to the team, "We're now going to punish you if you don't get your fans in order." And a £30,000 fine is no longer acceptable. Kick him out of the FA Cup, because again,
£30,000 is nothing really, is it? For a football club.
It obviously depends on the football club, but do you know what I mean? It's because again, these racist idiots love their football club. They will have tattoos on their legs. They're like, again, using Millwall till I die. They will miss family events to watch Millwall. Millwall getting to the FA Cup final will be one of the biggest days in their lives.
Yeah.
If you then take it away from them because of how they behaved, if they end up not caring, the rest of the fan base will care, and the rest of the fan base will then turn around to them and say, "You are no longer welcome at our club. Do not step foot at the new den because we are not tolerating this no more."
What do you think about the role of other supporters inside the stadium? Do you think it's that they have kind of almost that they should be challenging this kind of thing as well?
Of course, 100%. I was at the FA Christmas dinner, and someone came up to me. He was a white guy, and said to me, if I hear racism or see racism at a football ground, what should I do? And I was like, report it. That's what you do. That's how you fix it. Don't stand there and go, "Oh, this is crap," and then get on Twitter, "Oh, I've heard this." Report it to a steward, and if a steward does nothing, then report it to kick it out. And if it's still nothing, because again, these football grounds have so many TVs, so many TV cameras.
Yeah.
They will find it. If you jot down the row and the seat number that this guy was sitting in,
then they can identify.
then they can identify them. And the Millwall CEO turned around after the video, went viral, said that the guy who posted it was an idiot and he glorifying blah blah blah. And it's like, well, he's not an idiot. He's doing what kick it out, what the FA have told him to do. If you see racism, report it.
Yeah.
And if the Millwall CEO thinks the guy's an idiot and is trying to become famous, well, when your team get kicked out of the FA Cup, now who's the idiot?
Cool. So we'll finish this part of this section here. Now, I know you two have not been on our podcast before. Not sure if you've listened to it before. But usually at the end, we usually have like a stupid question we hope will come from people who listen to the show eventually, whenever we get out of the pilot stages of it. So we normally have a dumb question like, what's your favourite pickled food?
What's your favourite biscuit?
What's your favourite biscuit? Which do you prefer? Cool as fuck, cool as shit. Just ridiculous stuff like this. And so I think you've got a question for us this week, don't you?
I do, yes. It's been inspired by our esteemed sports editor, Kadeem Simmonds. And I would like
If this is about Star
everybody to
Trek.
know...
If this is about Star Trek.
It might be. It is about Star Trek, yes. Can you name your favourite Star Trek character? I mean, obviously I call you Spock, but you don't have to choose Spock.
Well, my Star Trek knowledge stems from the latest movies. I haven't seen anything before that, no matter what you say.
Steve's old enough to have seen the very first episode.
Steve was actually in that pilot. If you look in the background, Steve is standing next to Captain Kirk.
Conveniently, you know the name.
Well,
I don't know anything about the old series.
I've seen 2 movies.
Oh.
Like Captain Kirk is in all the movies. Like there's nothing I
Is
can
he?
do
I
about.
don't know. I haven't seen them.
So who's your favourite character then?
Ironically, probably a Spock. Do you know what Spock is? Like the whole Vulcan grip. Like he'll touch you in a certain part and paralyze
And
you.
what's that thing again? What did you call it?
It's live long and prosper. Which again,
It's also a podcast, and no one can see you doing the hand signal. Just so you know.
The hand signal was Spock's, that weirdo thing that Spock does.
Well, see, and if you had ever asked me why I like that or why I know what it is, for those who know me, I'm a big Neptune and Pharrell fan. Pharrell has his label Star Trek because Pharrell is a massive Star Trek fan, so his label called Star Trek, and that's the signal that they make. Again, the Vulcan hand thing. So that's how I learned about what it means. You can laugh all you want. I'm stating facts. Google it.
You seem to know a lot about what's a Vulcan.
Again, I've seen 2 Star Trek movies. I actually pay attention to what I'm listening to.
Is Spock a Vulcan?
I think so, yeah.
I think he is, yeah.
He's not.
Isn't
Incorrect.
Incorrect?
Spock,
What is he?
Half Vulcan, half human.
Oh, I see.
And you want to call me the Star Trek? Okay, do you know what?
Do you know where I got that from, actually?
Go on then.
From The Office. I watched a rerun of The Office the other day. And it comes up in there.
The American or the UK one?
The UK one, Ricky
UK
Gervais
one.
one.
Why would I watch the American
The
one?
American one's
Shit.
better than the UK one.
No way.
Yes, it really
No,
is. Okay,
no.
but this is for
No,
another. This is
no.
for another podcast.
No.
The American
So-
one is
No,
brilliant.
no.
I'm going to say, I don't know anything about Star Trek, but my favourite Star Wars character is
Don't
definitely...
mix them up.
Well, I don't care. My favourite Star Wars character is Darth Vader. How about you, Gulistan? You got a...
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Either.
Star Trek, I'm going to go with Captain Kirk. I just think he's a cool guy. Star Wars, I'm going to go with someone from the new movies. I'm going to go with Cassian Andor.
Oh,
One.
Oh.
that's a good answer. I don't even know who that is. Who is Cassian Andor?
I don't remember how to describe it, but he was in new movies. He was trying to kill Jyn Erso's dad.
Who's Jyn Erso?
You know the guy that created the first Death Star?
Oh,
Yes.
His daughter. So they team up together.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I'm going to go with Cassian.
Sounds good.
Is that
Sounds
from,
good.
that from the Solo movie?
No, Rogue One.
Oh, Rogue One is excellent.
It's
Yeah.
Really good.
Was Rogue One the one set before?
Rogue One is in between...
Yeah, they had that, the timeline got really confusing for me.
Rogue
So
One is
it's
between...
Before A New Hope?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
How about you, Steve? You're a big Trekkie, aren't you? Who's your favourite character?
I just... My mind's a little bit blown by the conversation that was just going on there.
You're too much of a hipster to know anything about Star Trek anyway.
You wearing double denim today?
No? Somebody said this earlier. This is a cotton shirt.
That's
It's not
double denim.
It's
Double denim.
Yes, definitely.
It's not double denim.
But double denim.
Double denim.
Gulistan, is this double denim?
It's double denim.
There we go. Thank
Yes.
you very much. Double denim.
All right, so let's finish this because I don't want to edit too much. Steve,
Yes.
you're a big social media user. If people want to find you on social media, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Sweeney
Star Trek
Steve,
fan.
at Sweeney Steve, and they can find me on Instagram.
You're on Instagram now.
Yep. Sweenaldo.
Sweenaldo.
Oh, please.
Oh.
How about you, Kadeem? Where can they find you?
At Kadeem Simmonds on Twitter.
Great. How about you, Gulistan? Are you on Twitter? You must be.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's just at Gulistan, but the A in my name's an X. So yeah.
Oh, that sounds quite complicated.
Yeah, just so I can just use my
Just
name.
Gulistan, but instead of an A, an X.
Yeah.
Not that complicated.
I'm just an idiot.
My name was taken, so I just did that.
Oh. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me at Colesy.
You
Great.
better explain how to spell
You
that.
spell Colesy with a W, obviously.
But where? Like you
Yeah,
can't
you
say.
can't just say you spell it with a W.
Yeah, but spell it out.
It's COWLESZ. Great, let's finish this. Thank you very much for listening. If you made it this far, you're a legend. We really want to know your feedback, so let us know what you think. Cheers! No one else want to say goodbye?
Bye-bye.
Oh, fine, yeah, fine.
Bye.